Yeah, a little bit about myself. So I'm kind of from a different planet, which is machine translation and AI and all that. You probably noticed that, those folks don't come here very much, right? I'm not, I'm here to help. I'm not here to eat your babies. Um, I'm actually a language guy. I speak 8 languages. I'll go head to head with anybody in the language industry on linguistics and language nuances. Um, so I definitely understand why we can't just throw everything to machine translation and call it a day, right? I understand the flaws of the limitations of the products I've previously worked on. In fact, that was my favorite thing, was finding those flaws. So um, yeah, so does anybody know what this is? Like, if you did visit this planet and someone told you more than 6 billion people right, cannot understand English, right? It's not even that they're not native speakers, right? There are actually very, very few people who can speak English, and on average, we have far fewer kids. So the other portion is growing much faster. And so again, if I were visiting from another planet, right? Does anybody know what this number is? Yeah, how much gets translated, right? I just made this up, but it's safe to say that it's well below 0.1% that actually gets translated at human quality. And so if you've ever used something, for example, before my daughter really knew English, I was teaching her to program, and she was using code.org, great product, but the translation into other languages was machine translation, and it was terrible. It was unusable, right? And I would sit there and do everything with her, but not every little girl on earth has a dad who used to be a programmer and can understand what the English was and so on and so forth, right? So this is the problem. There's tons of valuable content, right? You take anything you like, a talk from Peter Thiel, or an article in the New York Times, all sorts of content. It's simply not available. And I don't mean in Swahili. It's not available in French. It's not available in German. It's not available in Spanish. There's 10x less content in those languages, and another 10x less when we go down to like Arabic or Chinese, and then another 10x less if you go down even beyond that, right? So we're doing pretty badly, actually, right? I mean, machine translation, they're going to do what they're going to do, but if we say if we care about human quality translation, we're doing pretty badly. And so the question becomes sort of, why don't we translate more? Like, what are the inefficiencies? How can we explain to this guy from another planet why we're not doing more for these 6 billion people, right? It could be that our managers, these CEOs like me, they're just stupid and they don't understand, right? Or it could be that we're not able to deliver it at a reasonable price and cost and time, right? So I would suggest that it's the latter, that basically it's extremely inefficient, right? If you say, 5 cents a word, 10 cents a word, that's kind of $1 a sentence. If you have, a lot of, 100-page doc or something, and you want to do it into 10 languages, that's a nice little bill right there, right? Along with all the other complexities that go around that. And we all understand why that is. But it is a fact. It is a huge, huge bottleneck. And I say this as a positive, which is that if we automate more, if we make this more efficient, there will be more orders, there will be more demand, because all of a sudden tons of content becomes viable. It's currently just not viable, and that's why people don't translate it. And so another question I get a lot, actually, right, if I talk to my friends who are mostly not in translation, who are in startups or in AI, and they ask me, well, like machine translation, it's way better than it was like 10 years ago, right? I mean, that things must be like either blooming there or collapsing or something, right? Yeah, I mean, I think even if you ask the biggest empty critic, right? If you found the biggest empty critic you can find, and you said, how bad is translation? And said it's terrible. And he said, how bad was it 10 years ago? Even worse, right? They basically agree that it's improved radically. And again, so we'd expect to see some huge impact. I would say roughly it's 10x better, right? And but if I'm a large a translation buyer and I have some stuff to translate in human quality, do I get that 10x more efficiently? I would say that the answer is no, that the price has hovered, again, roughly around 5-10 cents a word. Yeah, so again, the question becomes, okay, why don't we translate more? And so now I want to get a little bit less abstract and sort of debug post-editing, right? So if we probed a little bit more, we would say, okay, what's the, sort of the standard high efficiency human quality workflow that you have today? You're using AI, right? Yes, yes, yes. We use AI there. We edit machine translations, right? That's what post-editing is. And okay, let's look inside of one of those workflows. It typically kind of looks like this, right? So we have an original, machine translation, and then a human edit. Or sometimes we have an original, a machine translation, and then the human approval, right? They just said, okay, this one's fine, and then they went to the next segment and the next segment, and so on. Edit, approve, 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 edit, approve, and so on and so forth, right? And over time, the number of approvals has increased and the number of edits has decreased, but we haven't really felt that impact. And I think there's one other important thing to point out here, right? That there's a lot of things that AI cannot do. So for example here, load folder was charger le dossier, and actually meaning like to load the folder, right? Sort of a infinitive, and the correct, and I trust to the human translator here, the correct translation in this instance was dossier des charges, is like kind of the folder of loads, right? So it's like a different interpretation. It's like it's the load folder, not load folder. And yeah, AI, there's no machine translation engine in the world that's gonna, know when it's this way and when it's that way, right? Without more context. That's a limitation. There are other edits here, though, that I would say are maybe good for style, but nobody became a translator to change, to add, to change un rôle to le rôle a million times, right? That's not, when you talk about like linguistic nuances and transcreation and stuff, like this is not what they're talking about. So there is a lot of that too. That's kind of what you see when you just kind of come into it as an outsider and say, okay, let's look at the data and see what's going on here. A mix, so I'm gonna call those very hard stuff, unedited, and automatable edits, right? They're currently not automated, but it's something that I would suggest that we should try to automate. And so the question becomes, so what % are just completely unedited? What percentage of the segments and how many words do those represent? And you could ask similar things about, hey, when stuff goes to review or when TM matches are actually reviewed, which in many cases they still are, right? And it's quite eye-opening. So I would say when I was first started working on machine translation, basically everything was edited. There was very little that was unedited. And this is how we got, post-editing distance and the cult of blue and all of that, which I escaped from, because everything had to be edited. So we had to have some way to measure like a bad engine from a really bad engine. So we got hung up a lot on post-editing distance and blue. Then over time, it kind of grew, and we're kind of here right now, where maybe the majority, a little bit over the majority, are actually unedited. We're definitely heading there. Sort of, it all depends on whose workflow you look at, the content type, the language pair, and so on. And there's a lot of selection bias there, right? Whoever comes through our door isn't random. And then you have those automatable edits, and that's another big portion. And then you have that portion, yes, that's just legitimately hard. We don't have AGI, and we'll need human input. And some of it, it's provably, it's not knowable, right? You have new product names. How is it going to guess that, right? Somebody has to go research new feature names. They go see what a competitor called it, right? That's the interesting linguistic work, essentially. So if we kind of look at this on the time dimension, we're sort of, I would say right now, roughly around 50%. And like many kind of adoption curves or progress curves, I believe this will be an S curve. So we're at the steep part right now where things are improving very fast. And that's kind of what we're feeling. So roughly half the segments are unedited. And then we have those automatable edits. And then there's that hard part, and it's going to kind of level off. I guess that's the good news for those who care more about job preservation than the 6 billion people. And yeah, this is kind of how I see it. And if I thought that we would just automate every last thing away and we could predict what new product names are going to be and all that stuff, I wouldn't have started this company, right? I would have just stayed working on machine translation and made it another 1% better every year. But I don't believe that's the case. I think the much scarier reality is that if we keep going like the industry was going, we would be at 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, and we'd still be paying $1 a sentence. And we'd still be translating almost nothing. Because 90% of stuff would be perfect, and we're not getting any efficiency. Not, maybe a marginal efficiency, but not a 10x efficiency. In fact, I've seen that because we have seen workflows where it already is 90% for certain language pairs. Okay, so the solution, I think most of you here, right, I mean, we're in Silicon Valley. Most of us know each other. I think most of us know right now that the solution is basically machine translation quality prediction, AI that checks if a machine translation is correct or not, if it requires human editing or not. So it's one of those ideas that's easier said than done, right? Requires the right data, right? But if you can get it right, it's extremely valuable, and you're able to keep the same human quality, but get this efficiency, and that efficiency grows as machine translation improves, which it generally does. And conceptually, this is extremely similar to another innovation. Going back in the 80s, right? Somebody said, hey, I don't want to pay twice. If we've already translated a sentence, I don't want to pay 100 times. So maybe we could automate this. We could decide to skip human editing for some of these sentences, and that's the TM, right? And some other crazy German guys. And that ultimately became the standard, and now we kind of all accept it. There are workflows where those are reviewed, but by and large, the industry would not function, not be able to serve, and have less demand if we didn't have those TM efficiencies. And I would go as far as to say that the TM had a much greater impact on efficiency than post-editing did. Post-editing without quality prediction didn't actually help that much. And the proof of this is very simple. That if you go to, Loquworld, somewhere like that, and you start asking teams who are post-editing, will you give up your MT engine or give up your TM? They would all say, take my MT, I keep my TM. And, right, I'm telling you that as a machine translation guy. We had basically no impact on the efficiency of human quality translation, right? Until you add quality prediction. So the question is how to get there, right? I talked to a lot of different companies and organizations as well, non-governmental and governmental organizations, and this is all easier said than done. The reality is most companies are not ready for this. And I think one of the ways to think about it is just when I go around, right, I would love to know, for example, what percentage is unedited? And naively, again, if you're coming from the outside, you'd think that if you just go around and you ask people this, they'd all know, and they'd be like, oh, 20%, 42%. Nobody knows, and it's not their fault. It's extremely hard to get this number. The tools do not make it easy, because this was never important in the past. So there is a way to get it in many cases, but there are other cases where they simply cannot get it. The data is not theirs. So if I kind of look at a sort of a hierarchy or like a evolution here, right? Imagine you have the monkey and then right, the man. Process is sort of the first prerequisite. So if you go right a little bit further north on the peninsula where the younger companies are, you know, most of them, they're doing things in spreadsheets, and then, you know, marketing's doing this, and right, all you guys know that stuff much better than I do. And then you have to centralize things and actually have process and stop this chaos, right? And then once you do that, I would say that most companies, at least the ones that, you know, show up to any kind of community event, have done that, right? Once you get here, control, it already starts diverging. So you can go out and find all sorts of organizations, some of the world's largest companies. You say, are you doing post editing? Yeah. Oh, great. Let's go look at the data. We don't have that. It's all at the edges. It's going to the vendor, the distributor, etc. Their Trados plugin is inserting it, and none of that data is there. Actually, they sort of trust pricing wise. They demanded the pricing, they got the discount, and so on, and it's happening, but they don't really have any visibility on all of this. So it's not in their control, and the same. This is not just about machine translation. This is also about the review step, about what happens with 100% TM matches. All of this, they do not have control or visibility. Right? So this is where a good chunk of the organizations kind of fall off the boat, right? Because if you have the control, if you're not just sort of outsourcing everything and trusting, then you're able to get the data. And, you know, people will sell you AI that's generic, right? But AI works a lot better when it's trained on your data, right? Where it's just like a human, right? So in this aspect, I'm not saying in general, but in this aspect, it's like a human, right? If you ask the human to do machine translation, to enforce quality, and you didn't tell him or her what your terminology is, what your style is, what your formatting is, what content type it is, that's not gonna work, right? And so these kind of things that we're talking about don't work with generic models, basically. There are a lot of other issues too around machine translation that I think we should talk about today, but let's move on and then we'll come back to that, right? So when you have the data, then you can have the nice AI, whichever type it is, and then you can get the efficiency. And I would also suggest, right, that efficiency and quality are not opposing forces, that efficiency is the key to quality, right? And that's why, you know, you buy cars from countries where there's a lot of efficiency. You don't buy cars from things where, you know, from places where they put a lot of human labor on everything, right? Because you actually don't get quality that way when your hair's on fire all the time. And yeah, we can go into examples of that in translation, right? But you know, none of this is about lowering quality. Any efficiency you get, you can go and invest it back in another review step. So this is the basic thing, and it would be nice if you could sort of skip some of these stages, right? Let's say I don't have a TMS yet, but I'd like to have the latest AI. There are ways to leapfrog, right? There are shortcuts and so on, but as a whole, what I see happening is that the organizations that were best run before all of this are benefiting the most. And those that were a mess are having trouble benefiting now. So all that, it's not like, oh, great. It's kind of, I don't know how many of you have lived in a country, let's say, at war or next to a war. So the thing is that what you see a lot with human psychology is they kind of tend to go towards two extremes. Either it's fine, it's far away, it's not gonna happen, we're cool, I don't have to do anything. Or we're done, tomorrow, they're gonna be at our door. There's no point doing anything. These are actually the same. Both of them mean I don't have to do anything. And we love that. As humans, we love that. So when it comes to sort of you see this, right? People kind of getting hysterical about progress in AI. A lot of it that you end up with this paralysis, and it's quite the opposite. It's like no, you got to go clean up your processes, clean up those TMs, have some quality tiers, all the things that you were planning to do in 2022. You still got to go do those things. Those are good things to do to take advantage of all of this. And so no, it doesn't kind of forgive all sins of the past. There are ways to leapfrog, right? And we should always look for those shortcuts. And there are a lot of good things about like not being stuck with a legacy TMS and not being stuck even with legacy mentalities inside your team and so on, right? There are a lot of good things about starting from scratch, but still having the right setup is very important here. So just a little bit more and then we're done. So I think you can almost think of these this hierarchy or this evolution as a response to problems, efficiency problems. So right, the first problem is no process, you add the TMS. The next problem is you have no data, you add control of the MT. You maybe also start like splitting out the MT, but I know it's very hard to have different MT engines by content type. You're not actually getting the efficiency of the post editing, so you add quality prediction. You don't have any way to dial. You still see this folks who cannot send one content type through one workflow and one content type through another workflow, but they don't. And I would go even further than this, right? So AI is not the answer to everything, right? This is not AI. This is just, hey, we're gonna have a docs workflow and a light post editing and full post editing and so on. But for example, it's very, very hard in today's systems to say, hey, I'd like the headers to go through an extra review step, but the body of the text in the file only needs one human look. I mean, it's crazy hard to do that in 2024. And this has nothing to do with AI, it's just good old software. A lot of things like that. Or let's say an A/B test. Say, hey, we're not actually sure which type of translation would be better. Let's run with 2 versions, and then we go with a term that did better in that market, and not say we run the A/B test in English, which is only 20% of our traffic, and then we translate from there. Then, yeah, not enough efficiency, right? Basically, either fix your MT, if it's possible. I know it's sometimes very, very hard, or look at automatic post editing. I do think the LLMs help here. LLMs are not the solution to everything, but this is one of the things they do well. And then, a lot of times you do these things and there's no evidence, right? Like, hey, we switched to this new workflow. Is it better? Is it the same quality or not? Generally, again, this idea of A/B testing. And the A/B testing, it's firstly proof that your efficiencies, that you're getting them at the same quality. But the other thing about the A/B testing that's nice is it saves you operationally from having to do lots of human evals. Human evals are inefficient and a pain, right? All these offline, organizing them, getting the labeling and all of that. So having, right, if you look at other industries, like, the reason this valley is this valley, everything, the search, the ads, the YouTube recommendations, everything is A/B tested. You're constantly, when you're opening these websites, you're in a 1% experiment. Or what we call the 1% experiment, but it's practically more like a 0.001% experiment, right? They're testing, oh, did he click on this video or not? How is this UI? Everything is done like that at these companies, right? I've launched lots of products like that. We would never launch a new feature without first rolling it out to a small percentage, seeing how the traffic is, and then doing the rest, right? It's just normal. And in localization, currently, it's just not the norm. It's extremely, extremely hard to do that kind of thing, right? To say, I don't know, just again, forget machine translation. Let's send 1% of our stuff through a second review, and then maybe send that to a third person and see if they actually found the quality to be any different, for example, just sort of as a live thing. Very, very hard to do. So I think that's about it. Happy to take your questions. I have a few that I commonly get asked, but I'd say we start with yours first.
It's on the other side of the room.
Can you hear me? There we go. This might be a really optimistic viewpoint. I don't think anybody learns languages just to consume content, right? The real goal is real-time interaction, where you definitely are not going to have time for a human in the loop to be able to do any of that kind of post-editing, and that means that the stress here is like not just on the quality of the models or waterfall of the models, but also hugely on the inference time. So have you kind of thought of like what that looks like in terms of we don't have the opportunity to do any kind of post, and we need to rely 100% on the models to get it right.
So if you look, right, I think your point is, in some part of your point, or the assumption there, and the correct assumption is that translation is a lot of different things. Right, there's sort of communication when you're traveling, there's watching videos, there's text, right? And the thing is that once you introduce just the speech recognition component, the text-to-speech, let alone the real-time constraint, it all gets a lot harder. So all of the stuff we're talking about, it's viable with text now. And so this is the place where we're innovating, right? Your organizations exist, you have the data, you have the system set up, you get the value because you're doing this volume, and then the models came along. I mean, it's not a coincidence that we started the company as soon as the models came along, right? We were kind of waiting for this. So it all is kind of lined up, but it's the tip of the iceberg. I agree, it's the tip of the iceberg, but it's the highest value, medium volume bit of content that exists. So it's the place where the innovation is happening. I would sort of say like self-driving cars, right? Self-driving cars happen here because the value is there, the talent is there, the whole setup is there. The roads aren't that crazy, right? There's no, sheep or horses crossing 280, right? So when we don't have the fires, right? So it's kind of optimal conditions for the highest level of automation, but yes, you're very right. It's just not there yet. In terms of the percentage of unedited segments, so to speak, in speech, might be closer to 5%.
I have a comment or a question, and this is either visionary or you're going to think I'm nuts. All of this presupposes that we start from some text and we're translating that, and maybe some human wrote the original source. But although I wouldn't do it today, I think in a few years, people are not going to write articles. They're going to use generative AI and say, here are my bullets, give me some examples, and generate an article for me. And then if I wanted in other languages, I don't know that I would translate it. I would just go to generative AI and say, take this, take these same bullets, get me some examples, and create it in another language. So is it possible that, instead of looking at optimizing this kind of workflow, we should be looking at a completely different workflow where we're leveraging AI? And again, I know you can't do this with AI today, but I don't think we're that far off for being able to do that and using that for creating articles. And some people today are using AI to generate text. No comments on the quality of what they're getting, but
I would say that that's already done in some sense, right? A lot of the finance articles are made from templates, rules-based ones. You have e-coms where they just don't do descriptions, they just do bullet points, and it's just jeans, denim, blue, straight, right? And that works for that low end of the market. And if you can do that, if you can get away with that, great. But the reality is that life sort of doesn't work like that, right? So if I want to share an article with my family, I want that article. I don't want some, AI generated stuff or some equivalent for that market or whatever. I want like that article that person decided on every word. I want to share that with my family. And so you know, you have the same thing in the enterprise scenario, right? It's a legal doc. Like, we need to know what that document says. There, you know, so there are certain types of content where that makes sense and great, but I would suggest that there is no end to the amount of content that is not like that. And you know, translation industry, people complain a lot. We're downstream, and it's like, yep, like that's the challenge. Like, that's part of the challenge, right? That's if it were easy, you know, we wouldn't need an industry, right? But it's hard.
You would also say that.
Wait.
I think. Is it on? Okay. You at some point you care about a specific article, specific phrasing, like you said, the one, right? Somebody with authority that shares something, a point of view or an analysis or whatever. You want that, not somebody else's analysis in a different language. Like, you know, it's like it's asking, I don't know, Biden to give his view of the world and ask Putin to give the Russian language version of that, and they're going to be very different, right? They're all valid, maybe within their own context. One more maybe than the other, but so if it's just random content, then you can do that. It doesn't matter who generates it and what language is generated. I think that the translation from a source is always going to be relevant for important stuff, legal or other.
Certainly there are cases where you want an authentic translation and the guy said what he meant to say and you want to know what that was. But if you look at a lot of the commercial stuff and a lot of what the industry has produced, and there was a definite market even when machine translation first happened where people didn't care about the quality at all. They just wanted to stuff the internet with articles because even if it wasn't good technical support articles, for example, it drowned out their competitor, right? And so they would just put a lot of stuff out there and people eventually find the articles that are helpful or they find individuals that are helpful in their language and community. And so there are a lot of aspects to this where the source is not that important as much as the content, and how the content is phrased is not important because you can do that in other languages. In some cases, we do transcreation anyway. So whether it's done by an individual or a machine may not matter. I don't think we have to debate that. I just wanted to put out there that maybe a different flow and a different way of thinking about this may be coming if it's not there today.
It's very close, yeah.
I think in my mind that's for the different purpose or different usage. When we think about if, as Adam mentioned, if we have already have the contents itself and want to share exactly the contents, the things within the article with, to the international customers or the user and so on, then definitely how to make sure that we have a very efficient way to translate or localize those contents to multilingual or different locales and so on. That's important. That's one use case. Another one, as Tex mentioned, is when we think about creation. So if the use case is I want to create or write down something which can be read by the other members, or I want to create some contents which I don't know the language, but I want to write it into Germany and so on. And then the transcreation or the Gen AI technologies like ChatGPT and so on is very important or very useful for that use case. You can just put the highlight over there and the engine can help you to generate everything. But I agree with Adam, for some of the use case, the purpose is not to really generate a lot of contents over there. It's really to, based on the original contents, make it be accurate, be translated into the other languages. I think the use case could be a little bit different, so the technology and the solution should be a little bit different.
I'll get you the microphone, but maybe this bears somewhat on your idea about quality tiers, and maybe you want to say something about that, Adam?
We'll take.
Yeah, I'm just what Tex mentioned. Actually, that was a great idea. It actually blew my mind. If can machine be better as actually the translator? That's the question. I guess generative AI, yeah. I was in GTC actually a couple of days. And it's amazing how they actually changing. So the question in my mind is, if we are comparing ourselves with the actually human translator and reviewer and other stuff, is the machine can go behind that actually. So learning all the books that exist in the world, all the language and everything, and couple of seconds and come with the output. I know it's a couple of years from now, but it's very close based on what I've seen last couple of days. Yeah.
I've heard, I'm always suspicious about a couple of years. So I think that if there were any kind of thing like that, it would not be specific to translation, right? Like fundamentally, if you can solve the hardest translation problems, you can solve a lot of other problems, right? There are a lot of, and I'm not saying that'll never happen, but yeah, it means, investment decisions or all these other things would be solved, right? And we wouldn't have to send emails anymore. It's just gonna type for us, right?
Funny story actually about the email. They were saying you're using ChatGPT and Gen AI actually to create the email. The other side actually they use the Gen AI to summarize that.
Right. Yep. Basically, nobody wants that crap. We all want bullet points.
I have a question here.
Go ahead.
It was actually just a comment on what you said. So I remember learning French in high school, and we were taught, don't make the phrase in English and then translate it. You should try to think in French and like speak in French. So I think what you're saying is kind of along those lines, right? Like you have the content in your mind, but you start generating it in French. So that was interesting. And I guess I do kind of have a question about what you were suggesting is, so is what you're suggesting is that we don't collect enough data on what post edits are made, right? So like we send out the machine translation and then different people correct it, but we don't keep track of those corrections.
Right, or how many they are, and then the same thing at the review step or any kind of workflow step. We sort of regard those intermediate things as things to be discarded, as sort of unnecessary, sort of unfortunate byproducts of the process, right? Everyone, the final translation, and the same in the machine translation side, right? They always want to train on the final translation. But if you're running a translation team, then having those numbers is very useful to see where the inefficiencies might be.
Don't companies track some of that? At least maybe not the number of edits, but the amount of time the translators or post-translators, post-editors are spending per article or per output, or there must be some metrics around that. Maybe not direct.
Yeah, theoretically, time is a very it's a very difficult one. But I think one thing to point out is that I am not at all suggesting that people are not spending time. In fact, I'm saying they are spending time.
Yeah,
they're spending tons and tons of time reading things that they don't edit. And the translators were right, basically, right? Everyone's trying to push post-editing on them, squeeze them a little bit, and so on. But the translators were basically right. If this takes cognitive effort to understand and really check, right, now I've spent the time. If I have to look at 1 billion sentences, and even if I only edit, 1% of them, I still had to look at 1 billion sentences. Like, there's no way around that. And I basically think the industry, like, because of failure to innovation, it's to innovate, right? Then, being the industry that it is, sort of LSP driven and so on, this is going to go on YouTube, so I have to be careful here, but right, the natural instinct of middlemen is to then play the squeezing game, whereas when you have a growing pie, that kind of behavior happens a lot less, right? But when the pie is fixed or shrinking, people are just going to nickel and dime each other. Oh, maybe unedited ones should be paid, 20% less, or that kind of stuff, right? Because we didn't have an actual boom. Yeah.
So when we had the machine translation, we create the post editing to validate the machine translation. How can we validate the quality prediction or trust?
So that's really where the A/B testing comes in, right? I mean, if you have two processes, so I think evaluating the prediction is very, very hard, because it's extremely, if this was good or bad, it's kind of subjective. Two humans can't agree on it, et cetera. But evaluating, just running A/B tests, where you have this new process and this old process, and see what the, on average, what the human decisions are about those, tends to be the way to go, versus sort of giving it to your friend and saying, hey, what do you think about these scores?
Yuri Chernouska. I'll try to phrase my question, but I'm just thinking along. So when we think about translation, right, on some industrial scale, we care for the efficiency of how to create it, the accuracy of style and grammar, which is solved case, which appeals to our aesthetic sense, and the accuracy of conveying the meaning, right? And that there is a fork. Meaning can be conveyed accurately in terms of message, as being said, connection with the reader. Is there any sort of is there any research going on right now? This and side of this.
Between accuracy of
Accuracy of the message versus the accuracy of the tone. Sure it will be.
So we have a. Are you responding to his question?
I know.
So, are you responding to his question though? Because we had somebody else who was.
And for the record, Morten is my boss, so I'll
I think I want to comment on text up there that I think we all need to rethink what source is. Source is not going to be an article that's finessed in some language that we now translate, and then we review, and then we culturalize it, and then we change it, and we go on and on and on to get this perfect quality. Source is going to change to something more descriptive, or just a marketing brief, or some type of nearly machine-like description of something. And we're going to ask some kind of LLM to create regionally specific content for that. The translation step is going to be out of this world completely. Not tomorrow, but soon. For that type of content. So we go directly from a descriptive thing to a target piece of content in a given language, I think, which is supporting what your vision was.
All the language people are saying we don't need language anymore. The machines are going to do it.
No. As you said, the scale of content is nearly infinite. So we'll operate the machines, but we won't do the same tasks as we do today.
I have a bit of a, not really answer, but since you asked about that, about the thinking which way to go, whether it be tone or it be accuracy, but I don't think we have to decide, or we are really deciding that. We are kind of I'm kind of doing some quality work. That's why I'm probably responding. So depending on the type of content, like I say, marketing one, we put a lot of effort to improve and kind of replicate the same tone and manner in localized content. However, if it's really a technical document, accuracy is indeed our focus, so we kind of differentiate. That's kind of, I don't know the answer to that. So one comment about, one thought now, since we know that all this content are being generated by AI, so in the future, I don't think people will think that this content, even localized content, will be that important, right? So I think in general, all these words, descriptions, any, I don't know, novel creative work will put less important because we think that it's all fake, all generated by AI, right? So that's my kind of comment.
So words don't matter.
Yeah.
Is this a language group?
You just described is what every translator goes through, a human translator these days, without AI, without any aid, but it will be put on some kind of more industrial scale?
Okay, so it's actually not a question. It's I just want to add some comment here. Going back to what Tex mentioned, like a this utopian world where everything is generated by AI. But I'm on a more positive side on this because I don't know if you use Reddit and they have different communities and they have really high quality content there. And I noticed because the company just went on a IPO like a month ago, and I know that they struck a deal, data license deal with OpenAI, and because they have really good content. I know that the time I noticed that their like data usage agreement was changed, I know something is happening here. So this data licensing is going to be like a valuable asset for company in the future, and this will foster a virtuous cycle for companies to keep improving that their content to meet the need of the data license buyers. So yes, that's my that's my thought.
I have some comments and a question. So going back to the language group thing, and in answer to your question text, you said that somebody asked ChatGPT to generate something just originally in Chinese. Yeah, that's me. I did that for my homework, for a translation homework, and it didn't go very well. Yeah, because I don't think GPT has that power in generating stuff in different languages other than English yet.
Yeah, later. It's just been around for a year.
Yeah, true. But what I'm saying that it has bias, like among against different languages. It has like more database maybe in English, but in other languages it's not performing as well. Yep. Yeah, today.
Which version? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And also the second thing is that is about the translators debates. I think like in order to get a good content, don't you have to have both? Like accuracy and yeah. But what GPT has given, I think it does have both, but it just not have something isn't clicking with that. So, and that brings to my question, to the editing and unedited part. So how exactly are you guys doing AI quality prediction? To, just to seek out the data and then to, how do you improve that? It's still kind of abstract. Yeah.
Well, two things there. I'm not here to talk about ModelFront, and I probably wouldn't answer that question anyway. So, sorry, but I think if I, sort of my synopsis of all of this is a little bit. I do not want to shut the conversation down. Don't take me wrong, but it's kind of what I hear a lot and try to avoid, which is that we are thinking about 5 years, and therefore we look back and, oh yeah, we didn't do anything in 2023, right? Yeah, so I see a lot of that, and I think that I do think that evolution tends to be step by step, not so you don't go from everything's totally manual to generating everything with AI, generating target. There's going to be a progression, right? And so it's important to make continued forward progress. That's my view, at least, a very biased opinion. But else it's sort of like there's a we're looking at this holy land, but there's no stairs to get there, and then we never get there. It remains an idea. So I do think that that a little bit, at least what I sort of promised or was obligated to give here today, was the more concrete part. I like to, obviously I like to think about the more out there ideas, right? There's a lot more that, we could, I could bombard you with and likewise, and I believe in that. But yeah, I think that basically what's missing in the industry right now is more concreteness. Okay, well, let's go find somebody who's actually doing this or that thing, right? Successfully and so on, right? Sorry to be the bad guy.
Yeah, I think even if we're progressing, there's still going to be language bias in GPT. Like how, like the differences they're performing in each language. Because back in China, it's kind of illegal to use GPT because we have firewall, and then you have to get past that firewall to use GPT. So that's like a gray area there.
Because it can't lie. It can't lie. Large language model can't lie. You ask it, it answered.
Well, wait. So we need it on the microphone if we're going to debate. But what about Chinese developed AI? As opposed to Chat GPT?
Yeah, but then again, they can't get in other language data as well. They're not like mainstream yet.
All right, so we have, Amber has a comment.
No, just I feel that in a country with tight censorship, large language model can be like, if you ask him like a quite sensitive question, for example, what happened in Tiananmen Square, will it tell the truth? And I don't know how governments see this.
Ben?
I think the tight censorship is a plus for model training because it provides hard guardrails that you can rely on. And when I use GPT now, it convincingly lies every single time. That's one of its strengths, really. But if you think about it, it's all a hallucination. It's only the part that we don't agree with in our consensual reality that we apply this pejorative term to, right? It's made all of it up. Machine translation engines have been making all of it up since the early 90s. And we've seen slow progress for decades now, right? The LLM models are quite new, and they're just as prone to falling down as machine translation was 30 years ago.
We have another question. I'll just mention, though, ChatGPT is not free to talk about anything or any subject. There's also some limitations built into there.
With like something like Gemini has did like a black version of Elon Musk.
But it did in the beginning.
Adam, question, hypothetical one, right? Based on your model where you see the future is coming, do you see any risks to further development of large language models based on like intellectual property, right? Like an example, I'll say like I saw in the news recently, the screenwriters of Hollywood, I think it was screenwriters, they were fighting for AI not to, for the companies not to use AI developed scripts because like the scripts are intellectual property. So like maybe, translations are sort of like the intellectual property of someone, and theoretically, can it ever happen that, there's some mechanism that would, stop further development of LLMs? I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So we want humans to copy our scripts, not, but no, this is actually an issue I'm very familiar with. I don't know if any of you saw, there was recently a research article, I believe out of Amazon, regarding the fact, they were trying to train these LLMs on languages other than English, and you know what they realized about the data that's not English on the web? Mainly machine translated from English. And that was an issue I used to hit back in the SMT days, right? So in the SMT days, you could see actually which web page you crawled that was causing that output. Right now, after deep learning and neural, you can't, right? It's not tieable back to a single data point. But in those days, you could. And routinely, the main cause of the bad translations, we're talking like 2010 here, was that the data that was crawled on the web back then in, let's say, Spanish, Portuguese, and so on was empty. And so that English is roughly half the content on the web, and then the other half. So that situation has sort of existed for that half already. since that half existed, right, when you go back far enough, there was no very little non-English content on the web, and now it will also be true for the English content, essentially. So it's going to be polluted like the non-English content is. And so regarding licensing and so on, I mean, we're going to see a lot of stuff, but I think ultimately the cat is out of the bag, and there's simply no putting this genie back in the bottle, and that you're going to be able to get an LLM, you know, on your phone, let's say in 2 years, that's as good as GPT-3 was when it first launched, right, or something like that. It's just a matter of years. It's not a if, it's a when. So.
One question.
Sure. Yeah. So Jean asked, could you share examples of successful A/B tests on translation or post edits that had a meaningful impact on a regular website or app? Right. I generally don't work with sort of small, you know, a website where it's down to a single button name, down to that level. In e-commerce, you can find a lot more of this. That mentality is a lot more common in e-commerce, including in translation. But you know, the type that I'm most familiar with personally, because we build it, is where you have two workflows. So we're not talking about a single term, but when you have just two workflows and you say, hey, let's look at the old workflow and the new workflow, and then give them both to humans, let's say, or see if a human would have edited this MT that was approved, right? So in the cases that I'm saying, it's not to optimize a single translation, but rather to decide to provide evidence that a more efficient workflow delivers the same quality as the less efficient workflow. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think also getting people to respond with quality information or feedback on language is really hard, even when it's really egregious. So my favorite mistake was, for some of you that don't know, we used to have client-server architectures, and we had this thing where sometimes the process would hang, and the message that we sent out was kill the client, meaning stop the software. But our translation said murder the customer. And I tried to picture people in the support office going, okay, let me get my gun. But nobody complained about it, you know, until we sorted it out. There's lots of examples like that. Do we have any more questions? Okay, and nothing else online?
Well, it's about a question about what we were talking the past Saturday in the log lunch. Is basically how do you see the metadata and instructions provided from the for the source content, how that can improve the machine translation, or like and the post editing, like what you were talking about, getting to the unedited ceiling, if that can improve the.
Right. So sort of like additional inputs that we could provide to machine translation.
Yeah, exactly. For example, for product names, like this is a product name, do not translate it, or this is the glossary, use this glossary for this or this new,
right?
Things like that.
Yeah. So well, yeah, we were actually at an event together in the city on Saturday. I think we were chatting about this. So I almost, if you just kind of back up, right, and you say, okay, you know, most buyers here in the Valley have UI, docs, help, marketing, legal. Maybe I'm forgetting something, right? And you generally use separate TMs for those. I think we all understand that those have to be translated differently, but it's simply not feasible with today's MT engines, in practical terms, it's not feasible to have a separate engine for each one of those. You don't see that very often. mostly we just throw it all in and get one empty engine, right? And so for practicality reasons, especially the fact that you have to have a different engine for each language and all of this stuff, you can't, you can't keep them separate, but there's these disadvantages to having them together. So I think if you look at some of the things that we were forced to do early on as a startup and to serve our customers and so on, those are things that MT, call it big MT, right? Microsoft, Google, and so on, should do, and I would have expected them, roughly 2019 when we started, I basically expected them to do these things, but they still don't do them today. So, I mean, besides the frustrations of just getting your API key, right? But there is, they still go through English, right? You translate from Spanish to Portuguese via English. That's insane, right? Which is why you can't get customization for those language pairs, right? So here it's not a big deal, but imagine you're in Japan or in Germany or in France where you have a company, their source is, German or French or Japanese, and they're going into 10 languages and they can't get customization in 2024, right? So, still one model per language, no customization for those. No sense of metadata, no ability to say, hey, look, I want you to know, for example, marketing should know about the product UI. Docs should know about the product UI, but I want to be able to tell the model, hey, this is UI, or which, this is a button, right, versus this is that. You see, I call them casualties. You see so many empty casualties that could have been avoided if they were an ability to pass any type of metadata. And you can go further than that. We work with folks who have large product catalogs, and a lot of the translation decision is about what's in the image. And, there is no reason with today's, and I don't mean today's like post ChatGPT, I mean like post 2017, let's say, there's no reason that a machine translation engine cannot take that kind of context. Like what is the image here? All of that stuff is possible, but somebody has to care, right? There's more of a last mile problem of getting it into your hands, so to speak. So yeah, I think metadata was what we started out with, and one large multilingual model. We don't do the images yet, but like it just, to me, it seems very natural that this is part of the problem. What I would put in the automatable section, actually, not, it doesn't require human intelligence necessarily. It requires a lot of engineering.
Any more comments? Well, if there aren't any more comments, please join me in thanking Adam for a thought-provoking and informative talk. A little bit more time, you're welcome to continue networking and enjoy the food that's still here. Thanks, everyone.